Why, hello, my friends. I am so excited for you to meet my guest this week. I am talking to Marc Champagne. Yes, that is his name. Like, I really wish I could reincarnate as Bronwyn Champagne. It's such a great name. Anyway, Marc is best-selling author, mental fitness strategist. Yes, we are going to talk about that. And host of the Behind the Human podcast. But today, Marc and I are talking about his book, Personal Socrates, questions that will upgrade your life from legends and world-class performers. And this book, you guys, it's so good. I love a good question. I think we can figure most things out in this world if we have access to the right questions. And Marc basically is like the Tim Ferriss of questions. As he describes himself, he's like a sommelier. Did I say that right? Of questions, a curator, a collector of really good questions, just like our man Socrates, which is why it's called Personal Socrates. Anyway, you're going to love this conversation. Marc is a treasure of a human being. And let this conversation sink into your bones and take you on a little journey right inside your big, beautiful self. Let's dive in. I think it will. Of course it will. And it's a small price to pay for all the beautiful blooms that are happening. And so I just wanted to start by thanking you, first of all, for putting your work out into the world. I so appreciate Socratic thinking, Socratic questioning. In a world of blowhards and yappers and talkers and pontificators, I find it enormously appealing to be with people who are interested in asking good questions. So I just want to honor your work. And I'd love for you to just tell us, like, you know, in a world of pontificators, how did you land on questions as such a powerful force in the world?
Questions. Yes. I mean, I kind of landed on questions by default through mental fitness practices and specifically journaling.
Yes.
And, you know, it started as a practice that, you know, I would get up a little bit earlier in the morning before heading into my corporate job for about a decade.
Yep.
And I was just using journaling and questions to really reshift focus or shift perspective if I was struggling with something or trying to figure something out, and also to, you know, to process emotion and all these different things.
Yeah.
Plus help think differently, I think is the other big one, because often people think about journaling and some of these questions as dealing with high stress and emotionally charged situations, which obviously it's, you know, very helpful practice to do so.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole other level of priming your mind and getting your mind into a state of, well, what if everything goes right? Like,
Yes.
Write that out, visualize that situation, and set your mind into this place of possibility. So anyway, so I was doing things like this for years, and then eventually got to this point where there was one of these kind of scratch your itch moments of, well, I was doing a lot of this digitally because in the job that I had, I was traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking, because it was around the same time as the big meditation apps were starting to take off, Headspace and Calm. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. People are open to being guided digitally when it comes to at least meditation.
Yeah.
But there was nothing that existed for guiding people into a journaling practice from a question standpoint, right? Or leveraging questions to do so. And that was kind of the moment.
I literally can think of a list of about 5 people who have asked me this exact question. Like, where is there the journaling guide that I'm looking for?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I mean, so that was the question.
Yeah.
And I only share all of that because, well, when I left that job to create, at the time it was called Kyo, KYO, which was the Japanese word, or is the Japanese word for today, helping people focus on today and bring moments of reflection, because that's all journaling is. The practice is reflection. Bring moments of reflection to anyone throughout the day. Like, you don't have to wait to go on the silent retreat to get this work done, right? And, you know, so throughout that journey, essentially it just started really leveling up my collection and curation of prompts, because I was interviewing hundreds of people for the app and my own podcast, and understanding from all these different life cases and industries and different types of people, right? Not just meditation teachers or yoga instructors, but writers, like Michelin star chefs, athletes, entrepreneurs. Like, what are the questions that have guided you in some of your most challenging times, and on a frequent basis, just to reset our minds, right? When stuff happens. So that's how it all came about. And I've somewhat turned in, and I'm happy about this because I get to use the practices and benefit from the questions myself. But I seem to have turned into some sort of a sommelier of questions in a way, right? Like, just how do we marry up a really quality question with a specific situation to make that situation better, or that experience even better?
It's so incredible. And actually, it reminds me of something I read in Susan Cain's book about introverts, right? It's something like the power of introverts in the world that can't stop talking. And what she talked about is that introverts are more likely to ask good questions versus make a bold statement or something like that.
Sure.
Do you consider yourself an introvert? Like, do you recharge by being alone?
I do. Yeah. I'm an only child.
Me too. Oh my
So
God. I love it.
we're a special breed, right?
Yeah,
So
we are.
I do really appreciate the alone time, or I should say, I appreciate the time to think. I've noticed that myself, or that has come up more and more. Like, even when I used to do a lot of one-to-one mental fitness coaching, which I really enjoy. Like, and I love doing things like this, and obviously podcasts. So, like, there's an extrovert part of my DNA as well.
Yeah.
But I would even notice when coaching people that I provide, or I listen and provide prompts and so forth. But what I would really enjoy doing is actually providing my own mind some space to think, and then come back and say, what, I've been really thinking about what we talked about and what you left with me, and here are a few prompts and practices that might help in a situation like this.
Amazing.
So that comes back to, I mean, my happiest moments in a day are early morning hours where it's quiet, and you're the best.
I mean, I'm
You're the
nodding
best.
my head
Yeah.
vigorously. Same. That's when it's fresh, right?
Yeah, it's fresh, and there's this beautiful moment of quiet, and whether it's prompts or just free writing or just being present with that calm.
Yeah.
I mean, for me at least, that's where the ideas come up. That's when I can hear the answers in the whispers right before the busyness of the day starts, and so forth. So yes, I would say, a bit of a long form answer to your question, and I'd probably say a mix of both, but I definitely would say get kind of my superpowers from being, an introvert in a way, and prioritizing that mental space to think.
That's beautiful. And I'm thinking about, um, I want to ask this question on behalf of all of us that are just, the past 2 years have been such a grind. It's
Yeah.
been such a long 2 years. It's like a 10-year period shoved into a 2-year period, right?
Well said.
What are the questions that you like to ask yourself when you're burned out, or when you are this close to burned out?
Well, for me, burnout is usually some sort of combination of our minds just being full, right? So it's any type of question that can help slowly release some of that mental pressure, right?
Ooh.
So understanding, so simple prompts that over time and consistent, use day by day really help do this.
Yeah.
How do I feel today? One word, right? As your coffee's brewing, your tea's steeping, your first glass of water, again, before the busyness of life starts, how do you feel today, and where in your body do you feel that? It sounds so insignificant, but just identifying what we're feeling and where it's showing up in our body often releases that emotion.
Well, it creates a little bit of margin around it, where you can
Yeah.
actually be with it. So just to give you like a real example of this, it's just been a crazy month. I would say week, I would say 2 years. It's just been a really intense month. And next week I'm on jury duty potentially. And there's this really sick part of me that's like, oh my God, the thought of just, and I've had to block out my schedule because it's jury duty. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, imagine if I don't have jury duty and I have 5 days of no meetings. Like the thought just makes my heart happy. But what happens when you ask yourself, how am I feeling and what do I need? And the answer is just, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired. And there's no relief in sight, right? There's so many meetings, there's so many demands. What advice do you have for those of us that are victims of our own incredible productivity?
Yeah.
Maybe we're the responsible for how crazy our lives are. How do we move? Like some of us are afraid to even ask ourselves, how do I feel? Because the answer is scary because it means you are this close to complete yard sale collapse out of exhaustion. And we're
Yeah.
afraid to hear that. What do you say to people like that?
Well, first of all, we're human, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's just acknowledge that we're all a work in progress, and to not, not to approach any of these prompts or practices with judgment. I mean,
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
thing too is that everything's impermanent. Just things maybe feel incredibly full and very busy, let's say this week, but we do have the opportunity to course correct and shift things around tomorrow or the following week.
Yeah.
What normally doesn't happen, and the reason why, at least from my perspective, the reason why we get to these points of just being full and about to boil over, for example, is
Yeah.
we don't slow down for those micro moment check-ins of actually acknowledging, yeah, I am tired.
Yeah.
Before, what normally comes to tip us off on that is that, oh, my shoulders are really sore, my neck is starting to cramp up, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's, I
Yeah.
need a massage or something like that. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's all this mental pressure that's typically building before,
It's
right?
so true. And if you catch it in the before moments, it doesn't rise up. And it's so funny, just to give you some background on me, Mark, like I am a die-hard journaler, die-hard. I mean,
Yes.
I feel one of the, we all have in fact, can we geek out for like a hot second here? Are
Yes.
you still a digital journaler or are you a written word journaler now?
So I have evolved to a any medium that serves the purpose in the moment,
Love it.
journaler, let's say. So I
Love it.
used to definitely be more on the digital front, and hence
Yep.
the app.
Yep.
But then, I started to become a bit of a paper snob with products from Baron Figs. They also published my book, so I've
Love
got
it.
their journals. And now, and actually, speaking about just like pressure in general, I
Yeah.
feel like a big weight was lifted when I released this whole idea of, oh, I have to have all the journals lined up on a bookshelf, or I have to have all my entries recorded in one app so I can look back and just let it be, okay, you know what, right now in the moment, I need the practice of reflection to
Oh,
process what's happening, and pen to paper feels like the right way to do it, or my phone app feels like the right way to do it, like whatever it is, to get the benefit of the actual practice. And then now you can just have fun with it. I leave myself audio notes. I'll
oh
do,
yeah.
there's a million different ways to,
Oh
to,
my
to
God.
journal.
I can't tell you how much I love that because you're right. Sometimes I get locked in sort of the preciousness of it because
Yeah.
I do have literally this. What is this brand? It's the only brand I use. And you hear that the MD notebook, the Midori. And the
Mm.
fact is, that is prioritizing the stupid thing over the function, which is clearing out my head. And that was really helpful. So let me back up and get back to where I
Sure.
was going to ask you. So I just am reflecting because I'm so exhausted and so pressed right now, and so many people I know are. When you say it was building up in the days that precede, you're absolutely right. And the days that have preceded this one, I haven't been able to do my normal morning pages for lots of really good reasons. And
Yeah.
usually I might miss one day here, maybe two on a really weird day. This week has been so intense. I've missed 3 days in a row. So of
Yeah.
course I'm
There's the
exhausted
sign.
today. It's
Yeah.
it's because I didn't have my little stopgap measures along the way. So I find that super interesting. And so the next question I want to ask you is And I mean, I have a trillion questions to ask you, but for people like, for example, I hate to make this a gendered conversation, but I'm just going to because I have a lack of sophistication around this. But it seems like journaling is somehow relegated to teenage girls in their bedrooms with their pink journal and their fluffy pen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why do we associate journaling with teenage girls? Like so many of my clients who are men are like, oh, I don't know, but journaling, like that seems kind of like I'm not a chick. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's the most powerful psychological tool I know of. Why is that, do you think?
It's something that I was up against when launching the journaling app, and also why I would say I speak of the practice more so in the terms of mental fitness, because then, people can relate to physical fitness,
Yeah.
and mental fitness, in my opinion, is the big umbrella term for really anything that we're doing to train our mind to work for us instead of against us.
Oh, beautiful.
And it's also a bit of more of a motivating, like I choose to, set up some sort of mental fitness practice, and journaling happens to be one of those practices. I don't know. I mean, I think the only thing that comes that I can think about in terms of why that I guess that perception is out there is
Yeah.
probably, related to the entertainment industry and in movies. Like we see
True.
that scene of like the candle lit, or
Yes.
the beads in the background, or what, like there's this perception of what journaling is. Yet it's fascinating because the practice has literally been around since the beginning of time. And if you look at like a lot of the study I did for my book, I mean, I look at
Yeah.
people like Marcus Aurelius,
Yeah. Oh,
and
I love
I
Marcus
mean,
Aurelius.
like there's the kind of the token journaler of
And
the
the book is
time.
literally called Meditations,
Meditations.
right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's ancient, right?
Yeah. So I think, that might be where it's coming from.
Mhm.
What's important is that, and this is what I try to do with my work, is try to link up,
Mhm.
curate the practice and the prompts with the appropriate narratives behind them. And that's why I
Mm.
host my show. It's like, okay, well, if I'm talking to a group of executives about a practice like journaling, first of
Yeah.
all, 100% of them are doing the practice. They're all reflecting. They're all
Yeah.
thinking. Just can we do it with more intention, right?
Mhm.
And then really
Mhm.
focus on that. And then
Yeah.
maybe I'll bring examples of, I don't know, billionaires or Olympic
Yeah.
athletes that are all doing a practice like this, right?
Mhm.
And just make it
Mhm.
relatable. Then all of a sudden, becomes really powerful.
And they see the value of it and they see
Yeah.
themselves as journalers, right?
Yeah.
So actually, one of the things I want to, and I may be doing this out of order, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of the stumbling blocks we have with journaling and with mental fitness practices, and something that I noticed in your book is our rational mind gets in the way, right? We get self-conscious and
Hmm.
we start watching ourselves in not in a good meditative watcher sense, but in like a judgy sense. And you said there was a phrase in your book that you sent me that I didn't understand what it meant, and I think it connects to this. And you said something about reference Dan Doty somatic questions. What does that mean?
Oh, okay. Somatic questions. Yeah, I mean, just questions, basically like that check-in that I
Yeah.
provided as an example, but questions
Mm-hmm.
to help us get out of our head and into our body.
Yeah.
Because we spend, again, linking back to this idea of our minds are very full, and at capacity we spend so much time up in our minds,
Yeah.
thinking of, we've got decisions to make, we've got
Mm-hmm.
relationships that are stewing, that are, potentially not serving us, but they're still there, the pressure is there,
Yeah.
right? So if we can give ourselves a bit of it's almost like taking your mind to the spa for 10 minutes, right? Give it a break, come into the body. And again, when you put your attention onto what you're feeling, where you're feeling it, it often releases. Because whether we like it or not, or whether we realize it or not, if we don't do this, that emotion, it's coming with us and it's jamming inside, it's clogging up mental real estate, it's
Yeah.
showing up with how we speak with others, how we think, it's blocking, that clear path on, okay, well, that's where I need to go, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just
Yeah.
full. It's
Yeah.
just full. So yeah, tapping into the body is so powerful. Even just
Which I
priming
never
exercises, right? Just like moving the body.
I never, ever, ever do that in my journaling practice, checking in with my body. Never. And I'm curious to see what kind of shift that will create. Okay, so now let me ask you a few questions about the people you've been speaking with.
Okay.
The high performance people, the people you in your book, you have some people you've actually spoken with, and then you have historical figures. Like you'll have Jane Eyre chapter with Jane Eyre and a chapter with Robin Williams, and then there's Chip Connolly, who you actually spoke with in person. Of all the people you've studied and or interviewed, which conversation was the most surprising or the one that really stays with you?
Oh, such a hard question.
I know. You can take some time to answer that, because that's a hard one.
I mean, I'll answer it in a couple ways, because the other question I get asked a lot is just like, what are some of your favorite questions? And this relates to this.
And that one's coming next.
It's coming up, right?
Trust
Sure.
me.
So this relates. I can cover both at the same time. I mean, the most powerful questions, or the highest quality questions, are the questions that are well timed and relatable for you right now in your life. So, and I share that, and I say that because it's the same thing with the profiles or the chapters I was writing on in certain individuals.
Yeah.
So the ones that spark in my mind are people or inspired the prompts and the stories that were most useful for me personally as I was actually writing them as well.
Right.
So one of them was on kind of a combination of Picasso and Jane Austen, actually.
Ooh, interesting.
And Picasso was really interesting because, I was studying his work, and, just his life essentially from a high level view, like a 40,000 foot view, and quickly started to realize that, we all know of Picasso, we've all seen, his work. And I started to notice that he has these legendary pieces of work in very different phases or appearances of his work, right? There was there was the blue stage when he was depressed and his best friend had committed suicide, and then all of a sudden his work shifts into this like rose-colored phase and happier colors, and he had met his girlfriend and then wife in that stage. And the reflection for me was, it's interesting because he's known as his entire body of work, not just the one phase. And isn't that the same thing that our lives are made up of if we look at the different chapters and phases of our life? So what came up was, well, what color phase am I in right now? And which colors have I gone through? And I started to notice, like when I was in that corporate world, I was probably in those, the blues and the reds and like the really like fast pace, like let's go kind of stage. And I'm shifting out of that into a little bit more calmer colors to just be more present and be more intentional with the work. So that was a big one that spoke with me. And then it links up really well with Jane Austen, which is another take on kind of who am I now, where did I come from, where am I heading, for example. And it's the whole idea of our lives are made up of all these different chapters and also characters, right? Like you need all the characters to make the plot interesting and to make a really great novel. I think the biggest one though is that, again, just like full minds, we all have the power to write the next chapter.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really interesting segue into something else I wanted to ask you, which is, you and I both came from a corporate background, right? Where we were in that world, and then we both left for different reasons and at different times to go do what we do now, right? I do communication coaching. You are a writer and all the things. You got a million jobs. Same with me. With the great resignation that's happening right now, I don't know. It sounded like you left for probably a million reasons, but one of the reasons you left is you wanted to engage more deeply with life and in a different pace and in a different way and exploring different things. Same. And I'm wondering, what do you think is going to happen to corporate America, corporate anywhere, with this mass upheaval of people that are just, they're tired, they're unfulfilled, and they're unwilling to work the same way that they used to? What questions would you, if you were talking to somebody who's still in the corporate world, who's managing a team, who's like, I don't know what to do, I just had 40 people quit in the past 2 months. What questions would you be telling them to ask themselves?
I think yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to see what's happening because I really think it's basically the result of mass journaling happening or mass reflection, right? I mean, the whole world
Interesting.
was forced into a pause, which then allows us to think. And then
Yeah.
people start to think and they start to realize, well, wait a second, I am on autopilot. And then changes start to happen.
Yeah.
So on the corporate side of things and leaders and teams and so forth,
Mhm.
I think it's the same questions that you would ask personally, like
Yeah.
where am I right now? How did I get to this place? And who do I want to become? Like who do we want to serve in terms of
Yeah.
our team members? Like what do we need to do to evolve? Because change is okay. It's
Yeah.
just we have to slow down and give it some proper thought that, okay, so all of this is happening. There's a reason for it. We can either kind of stick our head in the sand and ignore it,
Mhm.
or slow down and
Yeah.
ask some questions, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what can we do? What can we do to, um, better our health and
Mhm.
our support for our team? Like, what type of people do we want on the team?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a whole different crew, right?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, the key is to sit down and really acknowledge that there's something shifting, something happening,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
decide where we want to go next.
And that's the hard thing for a lot of people.
One
Um,
question to unpack that's always a fun one is just what am I pretending not to know?
oh, I love that question. I love that question. And talk about well timed and relevant. At certain stages in my life, that question will surface, and it is always so powerful. And the answer is usually right there. You
Oh
know what I
yeah,
mean? Like if you're in the
yeah,
right mental state, it surfaces pretty quickly. What
yeah,
question am I pretending not to know? What are some of your other favorites? I have to ask your other favorite questions.
yeah. I mean,
I
the
love
one
the
that
idea of curating questions. It's brilliant.
thank you. I mean, the one that I come to the most when I feel like my mind is filling